At the end of the 1980s, the Soviet Union was weakening, and political movements in Georgia grew stronger. Many Georgians demanded independence and the restoration of sovereignty lost in 1921. One of the main figures of this movement was Zviad Gamsakhurdia, a former dissident who opposed Soviet rule for years. He became a symbol of independence and democratic change. However, Georgia entered independence with serious internal divisions. The country was ethnically diverse. Two autonomous regions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, had their own political demands. South Ossetian leaders pushed for closer ties with Russia and greater autonomy. Abkhaz leaders demanded the restoration of a Soviet-era power-sharing system that would reduce Georgian influence. These tensions had existed since the Soviet period and grew stronger as central authority weakened. In March 1991, Georgia held a referendum and the majority voted for independence. On the 9th of April 1991, Georgia officially declared independence. Gamsakhurdia won the presidential election in May. But the new state had almost no functioning army, a weak police force, and no stable institutions. Power increasingly shifted to paramilitary groups, which had formed during the final years of the USSR. These included the National Guard, led by Tengiz Kitovani, and the Mkhedrioni, led by Jaba Yoseliani. They acted independently and controlled their own territories. The government tried to centralize authority, but opponents accused Gamsakhurdia of concentrating too much power and suppressing dissent. Supporters argued he was trying to stabilize a collapsing state. Both interpretations existed, and the conflict slowly became personal and factional. By late 1991, the political crisis turned into an armed one. Before the civil war in Tbilisi, Georgia was already fighting in South Ossetia. Clashes around Skin Valley began in 1990 after South Ossetian authorities declared sovereignty. Militias formed on both sides. The Georgian government attempted to restore control but faced resistance. By mid-1991, the National Guard split after Kitovani accused the president of limiting his authority. Some units refused to obey government orders. Gamsakhurdia attempted to remove commanders he no longer trusted, but this only increased the confrontation. At the same time, the band Mkhedrioni operated independently and gained support from criminals, political opponents, and members of the former elite. In Tbilisi, protests took place near parliament. Opposition groups accused the president of authoritarianism, while government supporters accused the opposition of attempting a coup. Both sides armed themselves and dug into defensive positions. By December, armed conflict was inevitable. The civil war began on 22 December 1991, when opposition forces attacked key government buildings in Tbilisi. The main fighting took place around Parliament, the government palace, and the streets along Rustaveli Avenue. Gamsakhurdia's forces dug in inside the Parliament building, turning it into their main stronghold. Most of Georgia stayed relatively calm, but Rustavi and towns in eastern Georgia had protests and roadblocks supporting the opposition. Ceasefire attempts failed. Supplies inside Parliament ran out. On the 6th of January 1992, Gamsakhurdia and his supporters left the building and escaped the capital. Opposition forces then took control of the government district. Tbilisi was now in their hands, but the conflict quickly moved to western Georgia. After leaving Parliament on the 6th of January 1992, Gamsakhurdia moved through western Georgia, but soon crossed into Chechnya for refuge. His supporters, the Zviadists, remained active in Samegrelo, carrying out protests, roadblocks, and occasional clashes through 1992. They controlled some rural areas and key roads at times, but did not hold full, stable control of major towns at the start. In Tbilisi, an interim military council invited Eduard Shevardnadze to return. Shevardnadze came back in March 1992 and became the new central leader, but the state remained weak and many armed groups still operated independently. Georgia now faced three conflicts at the same time: the internal war in Mingrelia, the separatist conflict in South Ossetia, and the growing tensions in Abkhazia. Once fighting erupted in Abkhazia in August 1992, the conflict spread rapidly along the coast and deep into the mountains. Georgian forces initially pushed north towards Sukhumi, trying to secure the Gagra-Gantiadi line, while also reinforcing positions in the Kudori Gorge and the southern districts. Georgia attempted a naval landing at Gantiadi, meant to cut off the Abkhaz supply route from the Russian border. At the same time, Georgian aircraft launched strikes on positions near Gudauta, Gagra, and Tbilisi, trying to weaken the Abkhaz counterattacks. But Abkhaz fighters, reinforced by North Caucasian volunteers, pushed back hard. Their offensives rolled south through Gagra and towards Sukhumi, reversing most of Georgia's early gains. Meanwhile, on the Central Front, fighting around Sukhumi intensified. Georgian positions near the airport and the northern outskirts were repeatedly hit by Russian airstrikes, while the Russian Black Sea Fleet restricted Georgian supply routes from the sea. Abkhaz artillery also shelled Georgian-held districts from their strongholds to the northwest. By mid-1993, Abkhaz forces had recaptured most of the northern coast, squeezed Sukhumi from multiple directions, and steadily weakened Georgia's foothold in the region. The Georgian army, overstretched and cut off in several pockets, was preparing for a major defensive battle that would decide control of Abkhazia. As the situation in Abkhazia worsened, Georgia was hit by a major internal revolt. Zviadist forces seized control of Zugdidi and surrounding towns. For the government of Edward Shevardnadze, this was a severe crisis. The uprising cut essential east-west routes and threatened to split Georgia, while its army was still heavily committed in Abkhazia. Zviadist units even advanced toward Kutaisi, creating the possibility of a second national power struggle. Zviadist commanders hoped that Georgia's defeats in Abkhazia would push local populations to revolt and restore Gamsakhurdia to power. But as fighting continued, their momentum faded. The frontline collapses in Abkhazia caused panic, and Russian pressure undermined Gamsakhurdia's local support. Russian airstrikes hit Zviadist positions near Zugdidi, Javari, and Sanaki, further weakening their ability to hold territory. By December 1993, the Zviadist uprising disintegrated. Government forces gradually retook Samegrelo. Gamsakhurdia fled toward the mountains, where he died soon after under contested circumstances. His death ended the last major internal armed rebellion against the Georgian state. By early 1994, fighting across Georgia had stopped. The country, however, was severely damaged. Infrastructure in Tbilisi and western Georgia needed rebuilding. Large territories in Abkhazia and South Ossetia were lost and remained outside Tbilisi's control. Thousands of people were displaced, and the economy collapsed. The civil war left deep political divisions that continued for decades. It shaped the country's early years of independence and influenced almost all later events in the region.